Hi, this video is on how to use participatory systems mapping. Participatory systems mapping is about collaboratively creating a geographical representation of a tourism system using layers of information. Most cities already have maps like these, but if you're in a destination that hasn't developed tourism yet, or not so much, it can be interesting to map all the attractive and unattractive areas of the specific destinations. Normally on these maps you see things like heritage places, musea, places where historic events took place, where attractions are, nature reserves, etc. You can also map tourist routes, trails, parks and other public spaces that might be interesting, and in some cases can also be relevant to map out retail and hospitality hubs within the destination. Obviously for tourists it's also important to know where accommodation is, where their own accommodation is, but also what other choices there are, such as hotels and campsites. Next to that, it can be interesting to map details on where public transport hubs are, like train stations or subways, and of course where the main parking facilities are, so that we can connect where people arrive, where they sleep, and also where they go to at a later stage. Participatory systems mapping adds a couple of things to this, because beyond the tourism system, there's also the destination or the city where people live and people try to get their work done. So beyond the tourism system, there are other systems in place. What you want to add to your participatory systems map is the perspectives of different stakeholders. So for instance, you want to know what residents say about their neighborhood or about their city. You want to know what entrepreneurs say about where things stand and what would be good for them. If you map all these also onto the map, then you get a more clear view of what the entire city or place is all about and which role tourism plays in this city or place. Moreover, very often if you try to understand what residents are saying about the place, you understand that there's also hidden gems and stories that are not known to the tourism system yet. So for instance, you could find out that there's interesting new places developing that are not a part of what tourists visit at the moment. That could be interesting to explore, and next to that you also hear about where problems occur, for instance due to over-visiting or under-visiting of places, where it's safe or unsafe, where people are looking for jobs, or where there's already plenty of tourism available and no more is needed. So all these elements you can add into your systems map. Why do we choose a participatory approach to this? It's important to get stakeholders from different areas or different that have different stakes into your map. If you only talk to people active in tourism, you will only learn about what is relevant to tourism. But if you want to really make a contribution to sustainable development of your city, then it's interesting to learn about what tourism could add to resident quality of life, or to what entrepreneurs have in mind when it comes to development. So getting all these stakeholders together and getting both policymakers and residents and entrepreneurs and cultural institutions at the table at the same time, all giving their perspective on what the city is or what the place is really important to also get them to understand each other. In the Smart Culture project, we did this in numerous places where we really had people take each other on the tour of the city or the destination, depending on what their view on it was. And this already led to a number of interesting conversations between people that would normally never meet each other. So they could tell each other about what is important to them and why they chose to participate or why they are interested in developing cultural tourism. So that is one element that is really important. The other thing is that if you bring these stakeholders together this way, it also creates a map that they've created together. It's a central point or a shared memory of all the things that they think are relevant for tourism or from a resident perspective of their city. And this information is stored together on the map, so there's a central point of reference for the future. And that is needed if you go to next steps in developing sustainable cultural tourism, because you need to go back to this information if you want to add things, change things, remove things. So in the Smart Culture project, we did this amongst others in Rotterdam in the area of Hoek van Holland, which is one of the 39 districts of Rotterdam. Now, if you look at the picture here, you can see that there's a beachfront with some green patches of wood And then really far in the back, you see the high rises of Rotterdam in the top left of the picture. So Hoek van Holland is a district of Rotterdam. At the same time, it's quite far from the city center. Tourism here so far is mostly oriented towards the beach, but there's a lot of interesting military heritage because it's also the place that defends the port of Rotterdam that you see on the right-hand side in the picture. What we did in this Sparkle tour is really take a lot of stakeholders, both from the municipality, so from City Hall, really far away from this district, local people, retailers, environmentalists, and we brought them together in Hoek van Holland to show each other around what is relevant of Hoek van Holland in this particular context of cultural tourism. This was interesting because we got to places where we would normally not discover and that you cannot find on a tourism map, such as the picture here where there's a bunker that has been transformed into a bed and breakfast, where the owner or a person that runs it explained to us how they created it out of the bunker that used to be there and how it's used at the moment. On the trip, we collected all kinds of different information. We had the participants take pictures and diary notes of what they saw and what they thought was relevant and interesting. So they could share that later on and we could put those together on the system map of the place. So this gives us information not just on what is interesting from a tourist perspective, but also, for instance, what is in nature there, or what are problem points in terms of the logistics of people, especially with visitors of the city. So this is a really rich form of information that you can use and really put together in a map so that you get everybody's perspective on it. So this led to this really wide array of pictures. There's a couple of here already, but we have about 200 from the one trip with about 8 participants. And all these places are interesting for some reason, and there's diary notes with each of them that tell us why this is so interesting. So we put these together on a map. And the map could look something like this. And doing this together, really mapping it out, also shows where things are connected. In the drawing you can tell where cultural heritage and attractions are, where you can find the main accommodation centers and where nature reserves are. Next to that, we also map where public transport and parking is possible in the area and where retail and hospitality areas are. Because these together form the tourism system that is relevant to anybody visiting this place, but they also are important to the residents, for instance. The nature is important to them, and of course they also fancy their own retail and hospitality outlets. Mapping this together helps to understand where things are geographically, but also how important they are or how many visitors they attract. You can do this by giving bigger or smaller dots on the page. So it's a sort of a translation of the information that you have on this. So what we found doing this together was also partly, of course, already available in all kinds of policy documents, but wasn't really tangible yet. What we found out in Hoek van Holland was that tourism is really important for the local economy, but it's very seasonal at the moment because everything is oriented towards the beach. And in the Netherlands, beach life is nice, but only for a couple of days a year and not every day, like in more southern countries, for instance. We also heard from residents that the average inhabitant income is declining. So the standard of life is going down because people earn a bit less every year. We also hear that the average inhabitant age is rising and that as a result of the combination of those two, retail and local hospitality are struggling to stay afloat. Local culture and intangible cultural heritage are also under pressure because there's less people that have time or money to spend on them. Another thing we found out that although for tourism it would be good to develop more accommodations, such as bungalow parks, for instance, that is competing with space for housing because there's a limited amount of space available, and especially due to all kinds of legislation going on, there has to be made smart choices about what to build and where to build. And a bungalow park can get in the way of young people moving into Hoek van Holland, which is also needed. So both are needed to keep this area of Rotterdam alive. We also found out that there's a lot of interesting tangible and intangible heritage around, which is not so attractive because they don't collaborate together. There's some routes, of course, available, but not a lot of overall picture created of why this is so interesting to visit and to see and learn about. We also found out that there's a lot of interesting living intangible heritage related to the military, of course, but also related to the marine and coastal history. But these stories are not told other than through events, for instance. So this could be an opportunity for Holland to create something that is attractive in the future, to create a less seasonal visitor range coming to the place. So they also come on less sunny days, for instance. And that in itself could be good for local hospitality and retail, for instance. If you plan to use participatory systems mapping, we also recommend to use visitor flow mapping. But that is a different tool, so we'll explain that in the next video.